Hello and welcome to Soul the Story. We are not doing a book or chapter this session. We are doing a special we're starting a special roundtable series. This is something a little bit different. Usually the format that I do is a one-on-one, trying to delve into an individual soul the story. And this time I thought it'd be very interesting to do a roundtable series where we get to the soul of what these individuals, what these guests do, and try and dig into that, and also in doing that, dig into their personal history as well. So we're going to start. We have three guests for you this evening, and we're going to start with first guest, which is a returning guest, my first returning guest, which is Ms. Kelli Fitzpatrick, who is an incredible author, essayist, Star Trek tie-in writer, and teacher. Kelli, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And then next we are coming up with Mr. Michael Jan Friedman, who has written for Marvel, DC, Image. He's written for television. He's written tie-in fiction. Of course, Star Trek tie-in fiction, and I'm sure he has forgotten more about Star Trek and writing than I know. Michael, thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure, Derek. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And bring up the rear, certainly not the least of us in any capacity, is Mr. Keith DeCandido. Keith is another incredible author, tie-in fiction, written for Marvel, DC, comics, Farscape, just an incredible author. Keith, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
So when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, wow, who would I like for this series, and who would I like for the first series? And all of your names popped up in my head because for many reasons. One of the first reasons is that you all, myself included, we all started with Star Trek in a different decade. And I thought that's really interesting. Because I'm sure we all have a different take on Star Trek in a different decade. So can you tell me what was your first experience in regards to? I want to get to writing in general, but I'm going to get to the heart of it right now with Star Trek. What was your first Star Trek piece that you wrote, and how did that make you feel about writing? How did that make you feel about writing for Star Trek at that time? And let's start with ladies first. So let's start with Kelli.
Yeah, so my first Star Trek publication was also my first publication period, and it was a short story for the Strange New Worlds anthology that came out in 2016, which is where CBS and Simon & Schuster solicited stories from fans written within the Star Trek universe. And at that point, I was teaching high school full-time, English and journalism, and I had started doing creative writing on my own time. I was doing a club with students, and I was just really into it. And so when I came across this open call for short stories, I was like, hey, this is cool. And I was just doing like a watch through of all of Deep Space Nine, and kind of going back through the series one at a time and watching them all on Netflix or wherever they were at the time. And was like, well, let's write a short story and see what happens. And so I wrote The Sunwalkers, which features Beverly Crusher, and after her last canon encounter with Wesley Crusher, and sent it off and won. And so that sort of pulled me into the world of Star Trek writing and professional writing and tie-in writing, kind of all bundled into one.
I remember that. I remember it was a large part of the story is about a sweater, and I'm like, damn, this is a really good writer because I'm enjoying reading a story that's about a sweater. But it's Beverly and Wesley. Keith, how about you?
I the first one to come out was not the first one I wrote because of
Oh, wow.
weird, just because of different publication times.
Right.
The first one to come out was a comic book, and the reason why I got the comic book is because I already had a contract to write a novel, but the novel hadn't come out yet.
That's
But
really interesting.
the first one that came out was a 4-issue miniseries. This is when Wildstorm had the license in 1999, and it was called Perchance to Dream. It was a next generation comic book, specifically about the notion came about because I wanted to explore the fact that with everything he had gone through, Jean-Luc Picard had the makings of what we now call dissociative identity disorder. He's a prime candidate for multiple personalities between the mind meld with a senile Vulcan in Sarek, being assimilated by the Borg in the best of both worlds, and subjectively living somebody else's life for 40 years in the inner light. And so I made that a plot point where he had to basically bring those personalities all to the fore and become somebody with DID. And then the problem starts when Locutus becomes the dominant personality. So, and I got to do some other stuff with some of the other characters too, which was fun. I look back on it now and cringe because I was a prose writer doing comics for the first time, and it showed. I'm much better at writing comics now. It's way too word heavy.
I think we all do that. We all look back at our earlier stuff.
For the most part, I'm mostly okay with my older stuff, but there were some technical issues with that. But I'm overall really proud of it, and it also involved a planet where they have 3 genders, and the people they elect a leader who only has one partner instead of the traditional 2. And so I got to play with issues of prejudice, which is always something that's fun to do.
That's always fun. Michael, how about you?
Well, when I started my career in general, people told me, you need to start with short stories and build up a reputation. And I said, nah, I think I'm just going to write novels. And that's what I did. So I had 4 novels under my belt when my agent called me and said, would you like to do a Star Trek novel? And I was like, wow, put words in the mouths of Kirk and Spock and McCoy. Are you kidding? And I was familiar. I was already familiar with Ann Crispin's work and Howie Weinstein's work. And I said, sure, I'd love to do that. And I gave Dave Stern, who was the editor at the time, an outline, and it was kind of a Scotty-centric outline, had to do with mythology and stuff. And Dave called me and said, Mike, this is exactly what we're not looking for. It's sort of fantasy, and we think of Star Trek as science fiction. So give it another shot. So I did, and I came up with an outline for a sequel to What a Little Girl's Made Of, where the Kirk android comes into play and takes over the Enterprise and so on. And I get a call again from Dave, and I said, Dave, was this what you wanted? He goes, it's exactly what I wanted, but how does it end? And I said, well, I didn't want to spoil it for you. And he said, Mike, I'm a professional. You can spoil it.
You can spoil it.
It was an ending that had to do with Romulans and so on. And that became my first Star Trek novel, Double Double.
Wow. I used to do that too. I used to not tell the ending, and people were like, yeah, you can tell us, we're professionals. Let me ask you, Michael, did your first novel that you wrote, did that sell?
The first
novel that you wrote?
Not particularly well. What happened is there was a distribution problem, and it didn't ever get into like half the Barnes and Nobles.
Oh wow.
So there was a problem there, and that was, and it was a trilogy. So when the first book doesn't sell it well, the others aren't going to sell it well. Yeah. But it was enough that they asked me to do a 4th book not associated with the first three, and that did a little better, but not well enough that they asked me back to the fifth.
Well, look at your career. All right, so I want to ask, in regards to Star Trek itself, let's just stick with Star Trek for a few minutes. How do you all see Star Trek from when you started writing for it to where it is now? Because it's gone through a lot of changes over these decades. I know, for myself, I can say there wasn't really a lot of Star Trek on television, right? At the time, you know, when I wrote Alpha and Omega, it was like 2005, and Nemesis was over. I think we had some Enterprise, you know, but that was rounding up, that was ending. So it was like, oh, no one knew what was going to be happening. So anyone can take this first. You know, just what was your impression of Star Trek at the time, and how do you think it's evolved to now?
Well,
go ahead, Mike.
Okay, well, I'll be brief. You know, when I wrote Double Double, there was only the original series, and at that point, there was only the 3 seasons and a few movies.
Right.
So there wasn't really a lot to bounce off. So the fact that I was able to bounce off anything was kind of miraculous. And then shortly after that, The Next Generation came around, and I said, "Wow, I think I could write one of those too."
Yeah. Wow. And now, do you feel like, you know, as more and more pieces get added to the puzzle, that you can pull from more and more places?
Yeah. I like having little pieces to bounce off. I like shedding light in dark corners, and now there are a lot more dark corners than there ever were before.
Right. That's definitely true. What about you, Keith?
When I started writing, by that time, Next Gen and DS9 were already pretty much done. I mean, my first novel was actually specifically came out of the DS9 finale. It was it was called Diplomatic Implausibility, and it was Worf's first mission as Federation ambassador to the Klingon Empire, an assignment he got at the end of DS9's final episode. So, you know, Star Trek was going great guns at the time that I started writing it. You know, Voyager was still on the air. And then Enterprise would follow it. There was a movie every couple of years, and then there was that fallow period when you started, you know, between when Enterprise was canceled in 2005 and the Bad Robot movie started in 2009. But I think it's great. I think it's wonderful. One of the things I particularly love about Star Trek as it's developed is this whole fictional history that it's got. You know, going all the way back, you know, just in terms of what's been on screen, you've got, you know, from Archer's era all the way through now to the 32nd century, and everything in the middle. And that's a wonderful tapestry to play with. And the storytelling opportunities are just infinite. You know, and one of the things I particularly like that started really when Deep Space Nine started is that Star Trek really means anything in the Star Trek universe. For a long time, it was just these are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. You know, it could be Kirk's Enterprise or Picard's Enterprise, but it was just, that was it.
Right.
DS9 expanded what Star Trek meant, and that's been great for the franchise. Now it's anything goes. And it's been, Secret Hideout's been taking advantage of that with the TV shows. We've been doing that with the novels and the comic books. There's just so many things you can do.
Wow, it's true. And Kelli, I'm curious to see the answer to your question from your perspective, because if I remember correctly, your first Star Trek was Voyager, right?
TNG. So,
okay.
Yep. But very, very end of TNG. So the Beverly story is set, you know, between some of the very last episodes of Next Gen. And my approach to writing Star Trek, I think, has been fairly consistent since I started doing it, and that is to find missing emotional pieces, like emotional arcs. And so the reason I wrote that story was that Beverly doesn't get a chance to mourn the fact that Wesley kind of goes off and she doesn't know when she's going to see him again, if ever, because the show ends. So I wanted to sort of allow her to sort of, you know, have that arc. So those are, as Mike said, like those sort of dark corners, but I'm usually looking for like where are the emotional dark corners that somebody didn't get a chance to fully process something. And so those are the interesting bits for me.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think we all love those dark corners and those empty spaces that aren't filled by the writers of the series, you know. You know, we'll bounce around a little bit. I'm sure before the hour's over, back to Trek. But I really am a little eager to dig into all of you and your careers as writers and your thought processes as writers. So one of the things I was just curious about is if you could like maybe condense or give us a brief idea of what your process is for, let's just say, a novel, because now we've all done them, you know, from like outline to completion. What's your process? And I'm curious to see if how much they're the same, how much they're different. Michael, can you start us off, please?
Yeah, well, for a novel, for something of that length, I always write an outline. And when when I was doing Star Trek books, it was like a 20-page outline. Now it's
Right.
maybe 5 or 6 pages, but I always know where it starts, where it ends, and something that goes on in the middle. And then I start writing, but I don't. Bob Greenberger always gives me always gives me a hard time about this. I don't write sequentially. So as long as I know how the scene together, I say I'm writing every day, and I'm facing that blank screen every day. Make it a little easier. Today I feel like writing dialogue, right?
Right.
Tomorrow I might feel like writing action. So I bounce around the book and write the thing I feel like writing that day.
As long as you, I guess, fill it in, you know,
Right.
who cares? Kelly, how about you?
Yeah, so I have started. I've written two novels, one of them for Marvel, and then one that's an original sci-fi novel that's basically at the completion stage and being sent out on submission. And for both of them, I started with uh, something that is kind of like a proposal, like a book proposal
Mm-hmm.
document that is kind of conceptually what is this book about? What's the idea of it? What's the theme? Who's the major character? What's their arc? Where's the location? What's the POV? Sort of some of these big concept things. And then I moved to a Excel spreadsheet with a 1 row per chapter breakdown where I'll give the synopsis and the target word count and the actual word count and sort of track things that way. Marvel had a additional outline format that I had to turn in to them that would track like specific items and Carol Danvers backstory and stuff that were going to be covered in each chapter. But those two documents, at least for my process, have been really useful. The book proposal format I learned from Professor K.L. Cook, who was one of my mentors in grad school, and I found that to be really useful just to get my head around like what is this book? What is its identity and its flavor?
Wow. I see. That's very interesting. I don't do anything with you like what you guys do. But that's very that's very that's very interesting. And I see Keith and Michael nodding. So Keith, what is your? I'm really fascinated to hear what your process is like.
I find myself reminded of something P.G. Woodhouse said about 100 years ago, which is I just sit at the typewriter and curse a bit. The but I also start with an outline, and that for the first 10 years of my career, all I wrote was media tie-in fiction.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until 10 years in that I did something that I kept the copyright on, and for that you have to write an outline first. It's required.
Right.
There are no pantsers in media tie-in fiction,
No, not at all.
because
Right.
the outline has to be approved by the people who own it.
Right.
So I got into that habit, and I'm glad too, because I need that guideline, even with my original stuff. Um, and then I write the full outline, and then I sit down and write the story. I cannot do what Mike does. I have tried. I cannot. I have to write linearly,
Mm.
at least on the first draft. Like, I can go back
Right.
and fill things in later, but when I'm actually creating the initial story document, I have to go in order. If I haven't come up with a character's name, I stop dead in my tracks until I come up with that damn name, and then
Oh wow.
I cannot do the insert fight scene here thing. My brain will not allow it. Pisses me off, let me tell you. But I go straight through, and then of course I'm gonna go back and fill things in later.
Right.
But uh, I go straight through, and I try to follow the outline, and there's always changes to some extent or other. I always think of the outline as like driving directions. And then every once in a while you hit a traffic jam or construction that Google Maps didn't know about.
Right.
So you have to take a different route. But that's how I go through. And then usually I have to go back and fill in things like description, because on my first draft, I'm always doing dialogue and the most bare bones description of what's going on. And then my wife or my mother, who are both professional editors, will read it and they'll say, "If you didn't describe anything."
Right. I'm the same way. It's funny because I have to, as I'm doing I outline, of course, as we were all saying, and I outline, but dialogue will come to me as I'm doing it. So a lot of what's in my outline will make it word for word into the book, and I find that it's necessary. Let me ask you, we've all done media tie-in. How has media tie-in impacted you, just as a writer and in your personal work, outside of like what you're putting out professionally or putting out for a franchise or anything? Your own material, how has being a media tie-in writer influenced or impacted you? Michael, let's start with Michael again.
Well,
like Michael.
I'm not sure I can say that the experience taught me to do one thing or another. But one thing it did is it gave me confidence. I knew that there were people out there who liked what I was doing, and I could continue to do that sort of thing in my own universe.
Right.
So I would say it gave me confidence and also feedback. After you write 30 Star Trek books, you get a lot of feedback one way or the other, and it gave me it told me that I'm doing this right, and maybe I could improve on this other thing.
Right. Kelli?
Yeah, I think two things here. One, it taught me how to manage research in a project. Particularly the Captain Marvel project required just months and months of research through hundreds of sources, and so keeping track of notes and keeping those things kind of organized has helped me in my other projects, where research was required. Maybe not quite so comprehensive, but and I guess the other thing is, from that very first Star Trek piece I wrote, the first people who read it said, "That is Picard's voice. Like, you nailed it." And so the idea that you could get a character voice exactly right, that you can make dialogue sound like a particular person, was just, it showed me the precision with which you can wield words to invoke a certain personality for the reader. And I think that's applicable in like original stuff, because I'm going for a certain feel in the reader. I want them to envision the person that I have in my head.
Absolutely.
And so being able to use, language in that way.
Yeah. Keith?
Kelli stole my answer.
Which one?
The character voices. The most important thing when you're writing tie-in fiction is you have to get the character voices right, because everybody reading it knows what these people are supposed to sound like.
Right.
So if your Picard doesn't sound like Patrick Stewart, the readers are going to reject you. I remember there was one novella I wrote. It was actually a Picard Cisco team up, because in tie-in fiction, actor availability doesn't matter. And there was a line of dialogue that I had originally given to Picard, and I realized that no, Cisco has to be the one to say this, and I rewrote the entire sentence because Avery Brooks doesn't talk the way Patrick Stewart does.
Right.
That's something you have to keep in mind. And I think because of that, because I started out doing characters who already had their own voice before I got there, it made it imperative for me to make sure that I got those voices right and distinctive. And I think because of that, in my original work, my characters also tend to have very distinctive voices as well. I mean, ideally, you want people to be able to know who's talking, even if it doesn't say X said in it.
Right.
And I strive for that. And I think a lot of that comes out of doing so many different licensed works.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it must, right? Thinking about what my answer was going to be, I'm also thinking about what Michael just said, and a large part, I think, of what we do as writers or as artists, for that matter, deals with confidence or the lack thereof. We have to have a certain amount just to put our work out there. So, I know that I think I've had different levels of confidence at different uh, times in my career. And I want to ask you all, in regards to confidence or imposter syndrome, has that ever weighed on you or made you, second guess? You don't have to give specific details, but if we could just all talk about that in a little bit. And I'll start with Kelli.
Yeah, I think I don't know that I've ever doubted whether or not I can be a writer. Like
Right.
that's kind of I've always known that this was part of who I am. But there was a moment during the final year of my MFA program where I was writing a book for Marvel and writing a book for my program at the same time. And I had doubts about, like, can I handle multiple big projects at the same time?
Right.
And to be fair, like, they were my first two projects, so that's not necessarily like a good thing to weigh it against going forward. But it was challenging, and so I had some doubts about, like, can I manage this? But I also had some really good mentors, and I had a really good community of friends and
Right.
folks who kind of were able to give me advice and encouragement and talk me through, like, yeah, it's hard right now, but, like, you'll get through it,
Yeah.
and then you'll have this process to go back on in the future. And that really helped kind of solidify, like, oh, okay, I know what it looks like now to take
Right.
a novel through an entire cycle, and that's really valuable.
Right. How about you, Keith?
It's only really happened twice. Once was on a project that actually fell apart, and it was that it fell apart that was the big problem. The project changed editors in the middle, and what the new editor wanted was different from what the old editor wanted, and it wasn't what I was doing, and it was a mess. And that was a major crisis of confidence for me. I'd never had a project blow up on me like that before. The other was 11 years ago. I did a coffee table book called The Klingon Art of War, and that there was while writing that was much different from what I usually write. That was I realized it wasn't until I was working on it that I realized what I was really writing was a self-help book, a very violent self-help book, but a self-help book. And I'd never written a self-help book before, and not sure I've written one yet. But it was really challenging. That was much different writing than what I was used to. And there were a couple of times there while I was working on it that I really wasn't sure I was pulling it off. I don't usually have that level of lack of confidence in myself. Certainly not at this point, having been doing it for over 35 years. But that was hard. Generally, I'm fairly confident, mostly, and I mostly get through it okay. But thank you. Yes, I pulled it off. So yeah, good.
How about you, Michael?
When I was in college, I took 3 independent studies to write a fantasy novel, and my advisors thought it was great. In fact, one of them sent me to an editor on Park Avenue, thinking it might be good enough. And so I was pretty pumped. And when I went to grad school for journalism at Syracuse, and a friend of mine was in the MFA program there, and he said, I'm taking this creative writing course. You should apply for the course. You had to submit something to get into the course, and I did, and I thought, this will be great. I'll do some creative writing. And the professor unloaded on me like I stole his children. This is crap. This is popular fiction. We don't do that here. Go away and hide under a rock or something. And at first I was crushed, but that only lasted about a day. And then I said, this guy, I'm going to show him that I've got chops, and despite what he says. And and thank God that's how it worked out.
Yeah.
But when he first said that, I was crushed because it was so vitriolic, like he really hated me. And I think I understand now that he was probably frustrated in his aspirations and maybe taking that out on me a little bit.
Yeah. Sometimes it's not bad to have a harsh critic. I had a harsh critic at the beginning of my professional career. Even before that, I had some harsh critics that really was like, oh wow, can I do this thing? Is this thing something that I can do? But I think it's that confidence that we all have as artists, that and that fire that's like we can't let go of this thing, and then we start to level up as we make our achievements. We start to be like, oh, I can do the thing. I am the little engine that could, I can I can right, get this going.
The thing is, this stuff's hard.
Yeah.
If it was easy, everybody would do it.
Right.
And you have to keep that in mind sometimes.
Yeah, and especially I'm not to say that tie-in fiction is any greater or lesser, but I think like you said earlier, Keith, we're putting words in the mouths of established characters that people have watched on television for years, for decades, and we have to be on the money. We can't ease into those voices. Those voices have to be page one, word one, has to sound like these characters, and that's not it's not easy to do that. I wanted to ask, have you all ever been in a situation where you feel like there's something that you want to write as opposed to maybe something that is not necessarily what would be palatable, or something that won't sell, but you're like, darn it, I want to write it, I want to get this thing out, I want to do this thing regardless of that? And we can start with you, Keith.
Yeah, I've got one project that I've been trying to write for about 12 years now. I actually carved out some time to work on it this year, and then I had to go back to stuff that I knew would bring money in. That's the problem with this is what I do for a living. I don't have a day job to fall back on, so it's really hard to justify dedicating the time to something where I know there won't be money at the end of it.
Yeah,
writing something on spec is really hard for me to be able to justify carving out the time to do. I managed to get 25,000 words into this novel, which was an accomplishment, and I'm hoping to be able to get back to it at some point.
That's
but
fantastic.
It's hard, because I have this eating habit I can't kick.
Yeah, and these pesky bills, and I think it's different because a lot of my own career has been having a day job,
right? And
so I'm like, oh well, I can take this project, not take this project. I can, I can not play around, but I have a window of where I can manipulate, finance. I'm not really so much worried about finances, this or that. All I'm doing is I'm just doing it for the art. But I think when you're working full time as a writer, I see a lot now where it's like, oh, I have to pay bills, I have to produce work, and so it's a very interesting thing. What about you, Kelli?
I don't know. I don't think I've ever felt really constrained by, I don't think this will sell or whatever. Right. I have always kind of felt like I've got one foot in the literary fiction world and one foot in the speculative / commercial fiction world.
Right.
Because I tend to write about a lot of commercial fiction, sci-fi, speculative fiction topics and playing with subverting some of those tropes, but with a really literary style. And so I've always kind of, I don't know, felt like I'm blending stuff anyway. But I love writing that, and it serves me well in my career. So let's hope that I don't run into
right. I mean, it's a good thing, right? It's not a it's not a bad thing that you haven't had that happen to you. How about you, Michael?
I've been fortunate in that I've always managed to find some way to get something that I really want to publish, to get it published. Whether it's I'll pitch it. There was a time when I was pitching to the various Star Trek shows, and when they turned down springboard because not because it was not because it was going already in the process of being developed, or because conflicted with something that developed that they were developing. When it was just, nah, I really think that sucks, I would say, no, I don't think it sucks. So I'm going to find a way to get it published, whether it's in the comic or in a short story or something like that. So I've always kind of managed to recycle. But if you'll allow me to kind of turn that question around.
Yeah, sure.
I always run into a wall when I try to write something purely for commercial purposes. When I say, gee, this thing is a hot topic right now. Let me write a story about that. Not that I really care about it, but let's try that. That never works.
Because it's not sincere, right? It's not. It's not from a place of sincerity. Sorry, go ahead, Keith.
No, I was just agreeing. You have to write something you actually have a certain amount of passion for. Even I mean, we've all done tie-in fiction. It's all for stuff that we actually like as fans, and that's part of why we do it. Is because we are fans of not just Star Trek, but of Marvel, of Farscape, of what have you. So that level of enthusiasm, of passion for it, is really an important part of it.
Right.
I mean, if we make money off it, great.
Which leads me into this obvious I guess next question. And since we're on a show in a roundtable discussion called Soul of the Story, how do you all reach into and find the soul of the story for whatever project you're writing at that time, whether it be your own or whether it be licensed material? How do you find the soul of the story for yourselves? And let's start with Kelli, since she's pondering the question.
I would say for me, it's about yearning. Like, where is the yearning in the character? What do they want, and what's in the way? And how does that speak to some sort of universal truth or I guess meaning in the human experience? That's usually part of the seed that I'm searching for as I'm trying to find what's the heart, or I guess you called it the soul. What's the soul of this particular story? And for me, I usually need to know, like, what's the setting, because unlike Keith, I usually describe those first. And what's the voice of the POV character, and then what is this sort of like yearning that they have, or where are they searching for meaning that they can't get it?
Okay, Michael, how about you?
What she said. I have this inescapable feeling I'm part of the Brady Bunch.
It feels like it a little bit, doesn't it? It's a little weird.
I was thinking squares myself, but yeah.
No, it's a little weird for me too. But yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And so anyway, I just have to agree with Kelli. You start with the character. What drives that character? What salt can you rub in that character's wound? And how does that character react? To me, that's the heart of the story.
Yeah. Keith?
With me, it's similar to that, but it's specifically the way the characters interact with each other. At least when I'm writing, it's how the characters talk to each other and what they say to each other and how they deal with each other. That's those interactions specifically are what tend to drive the story for me. What kind of conversations they have, what kind of arguments they have, what meals they share together, what they do on their off time, how they banter with each other, how good friends insult each other, stuff like that.
Right.
That's everything else kind of comes out of that, and that's always the soul of
the soul of right. I think we're all saying that we're trying to find a center, and whether it's a center emotionally or intellectually or a character center, it's a center that we're looking for. And how do we build, I guess, out of that, you know. So I'm just jumping around here, but thinking about careers, like I've been thinking a lot about like what I'm known for now, you know. And someone said, "Oh, you're a Star Trek writer." I'm like, "Yeah, I am, and I'm thankful for that. I do other things too, but I'm a Star Trek writer. So, but I am now known for writing an autobiography of Benjamin Sisko, and that I've come to understand and realize is just going to be the case until the day I die, maybe even after. Is there something that you all are that people identify specifically with you and your writing, whether it be a genre or specific project or book? And you know, let's start with let's start with Keith.
I'm still thought of by a lot of people as a Star Trek writer, even though I've done, like, aside from 5 short stories, I've done no Star Trek work in 10 years and no Star Trek novels in 15 years.
Wow.
But you know, that's probably the most popular thing I've written, you know. And I've written a great deal about it. Plus I still write about Star Trek for Reactor Magazine. So that you know, I did all the rewatches and I've been reviewing the new show. So I'm still, you know, keeping my hand in as somebody who writes about Star Trek, even if I'm not writing Star Trek fiction. So that's really what I'm best known for, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like a typecast, but it's a little bit like those actors that play Superman or something. Right. You know, they're known for that no matter what else.
It'd be nice to be known for some of the other, you know, dozens and dozens of things I've done, but you know, such is life. Right. I can live with being typecast as a Star Trek writer just because I love Star Trek and I love being associated with it. And,
right.
So, you know,
and right. And Michael, I also forgot to mention that you also have written for Star Wars as well, sir. You've done it all. But how do you feel about that?
How do I feel about what I'm known for?
Yeah, what you're known for.
Definitely Star Trek, and I'm happy with that. I'm very happy with it. You know, I've written other things. Star Trek's probably half of my oeuvre, but
right.
but I'm, you know, I'm very happy to be known that way. You know, it's funny. I once ran into a guy who said, "Oh no, you write all these Star Trek books. You must hate that. You must have this burning desire to be known for something else." And I said, you know, if I were on the staff of a Star Trek show for 35 years, you know, people would go, "Oh, that's great. That's terrific. You're writing the same thing for 35 years." And I feel like I've been doing that. I'm on the staff of a show. I just happen to be doing it in prose. So I'm very happy to be known that way.
I like that. I like that a lot. I hadn't really thought about it like that, but I like that a lot. How about you, Kelli?
Same. Since I got my start as a Star Trek writer, I think I will always be recognized as that probably first, although it's skewing a little bit Marvel these days. Also, and I think I've done a lot of short stories in the sci-fi realm, and I think I'm probably also known for writing women in science fiction, and particularly writing like complex female leads in kind of non-traditional roles. And that's something I'm sort of happy to be known as well.
Right, definitely, I would say that, and that makes me think. Keith and Michael, do you have a signature? Like, you know, Kelli is known for writing women, which she does beautifully. But do you think you have a signature of that says this is a Keith DeCandido or Michael Jan Vincent book? Let's ask Keith first.
Probably Klingons, just because I've done so many Klingons.
You've done a lot of Klingons, right?
I've done a lot of Klingons, and yes, and in fact, I very specifically I very specifically asked to do when Marco Palmieri is putting together the Worlds of Deep Space Nine series.
Right.
I specifically asked to do Ferenginar because the Ferengi are 180 degrees from the Klingons, and I wanted to do something different. And I had so much fun writing that. But no, I've been a huge fan of the Klingons. Pretty much, I blame Michael and Sarah mostly because Kang made a very big impression on me when I was a little kid watching the show. And and so I kept coming back to writing the Klingons quite a bit. So that, if I'm known for that, that's fine. That and writing about presidents, because Articles of the Federation is something that people really like. So,
right? Isn't Articles of the Federation like it's basically like West Wing in Star Trek in a lot of ways, right?
And I even got to write about, because they actually introduced a president of the Federation on Discovery, so I got to write a short story with her for Star Trek Explorer.
That's right.
Which was great. Which I was like, I have to write this. Yeah.
And Klingons are so giving, so I mean, they just keep, it's a plethora. How about you, Michael?
Well, within Star Trek, I'm probably known best for writing Picard, because I wrote in the first Next Generation hardcover, which spawned a series and a cast of characters that other writers used. But with regard to my my writing in general, I would say I'm best known for social justice themes and depicting marginalized groups. I had the honor of writing the first gay superhero romance story in a Flash annual. I wrote a story for Justice League Task Force, a 3-issue story, where our heroes were pitted against a group of superpowered white supremacists. So those are things I like to get into.
Wow. That's amazing. And that is so weird. That's so wild, because I was going to ask, we all want to entertain our audiences, right? Of course. But has there ever been something that you felt a burning desire to speak about? Or has there ever been something that you really felt you needed to exercise from yourself through your writing? Because that I found both of those has happened to me. There have been things I've wanted to speak about, and so I've done it through my writing. And I've had a issue or two. I was like, you know what? Let me give this to this character. As a matter of fact, it was actually Denny O'Neil who kind of taught me that. Having a conversation with him, he was like, if you have something, man, that's too big for you, give it to the character. And giving it to the character makes it smaller. And I was like, what? And I really didn't understand some of the things he was telling me. And then once I started doing that, I was like, oh, I see where he's coming from. So have you all had a situation like that? We'll go back to you, Michael.
Not in a big way, but in small ways. As I encounter little bumps in the road in life, I deal with them in stories. For instance, I have these things called floaters. Right? Floaters are little pieces of vitreous matter from the back of your eye that float to the front. Right. And if you focus on them, they look like tiny little dots in your field of vision. Most of the time you don't focus on them and you don't even know they're there. It's not a big deal. But when it first started happening, I was like, what the hell are these? And so I wrote a story called Floaters, where it was a kind of story with supernatural elements, and the villain gets his in the end, but it was cathartic, right? because I was able to deal with this thing in my life and put it down on the printed page.
Wow, that's amazing. I've done some of that, like with things with my hip, and I'm like, yeah, let me give it to this character, or let me show a character going through trials like that, because then that makes me feel better, but it's a way to just, it's therapy, right? It's therapy for us, How about you, Kelli?
I don't do this very often, but there's one example that I can think of. I once lived in a house that all of my neighbors swore was cursed, because things kept breaking in strange ways. So the sump pump failed, and then 2 days later, the first floor of the house flooded, and then a couple days later, somebody ran over my mailbox, and they fixed it. The very next night, somebody ran over the mailbox again. It was just it was so bizarre. And so I wrote this short story about a woman who is living in such a house, and she's at war with her house. And trying to process this, and I turned it into like this like fantasy story. So I have been there where you just have to like
just
you just have to process the thing. But I mean, that's a very specific example, but I think more in general, like, we've all been through grief, and we've all been through loss, and we've all been through ecstasy, and we've all been through doubt. And so I think you can leverage these moments more generally without having to perfectly recreate the circumstance.
Yeah, absolutely. Keith?
I have two examples. One is a specific example of needing to get something out of my system, which was I live in New York, and I lived through 9/11 in 2001. And there was a story I wrote for an anthology called Tales of the Dominion War, which Mike was in also, which was, and I specifically wanted to write the fall of Beta Z from the point of view of Loxana Troy, because one of the things that the effects of 9/11, for me and for a lot of other people, was a kick in our complacency. And there is no more complacent character in the Star Trek universe than Loxana Troy.
Right.
And so I specifically wanted it to be like her point of view of watching her world fall apart, and be attacked. And that was incredibly useful for me cathartically to just get that out of my system. And I was really proud of that story. I'm so proud of that story.
Wow. Yeah, it's
20 years later. More generally, I try very hard to improve. I mean, representation is very important. It's something that's always been very important to me. My particular corner of representation is people of Italian descent, because I am. And I remember when I was a kid going through the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, which was a thing they put out in the 80s.
I remember, yeah.
Like,
I remember.
All the different going through it, looking for Italians, and only finding two: the Punisher.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, wow.
And a few others, but they were all criminals. Like the only even remotely heroic characters were a violent anti-hero and a joke character, and that was it. And I kept noticing that in popular culture, Italian Americans were always either gangsters, comic relief, or both.
Wow.
And so I'm trying to change that, all by myself.
Yeah.
And that's something that it's been very important to me to show, different types of. My novel that's coming out in October, the Supernatural Crimes Unit, which is the new original series I'm doing. Two of the main characters are Italian. They're two completely different types of Italians.
Yeah.
And that just in general, representation is important. Frogman was the other one.
Frogman.
Yeah. I live in New York. I see people of multiple ethnicities, multiple religions, multiple sexual preferences, and I try to represent that in my fiction all the time.
I think authenticity is really big, right? And I think as writers and as artists, what we try and do. For me, it's been I've been very fortunate where I've been able to write a lot of what I want to say. Doing that through Cisco has helped a lot, So I definitely understand. I remember, Keith, the first thing I actually read of yours before I think I even knew you was the Tales of Dominion War. And I was like, oh wow, the four beds. It was really pretty dope. So at this point, we've all been in the game, not that it's a game, but we've all been in it for a little while now, right? So we've had ups and downs. Is there anything that challenges you now? And I'll say for me, I find the challenge is I really don't want to repeat myself. And so I'm always trying to push myself and find something different and some different angle and way to do something. But I'm more curious about your careers, and is there anything that you find that challenge you still, or challenges that you want to maybe even attack? And we'll start with Kelli.
Yeah, I think I want to write all the things at once. So, I've got all these ideas. Over the last maybe about a year ago, I had these two big book projects, and that was my main focus. And then coming out of that, I had several smaller projects I needed to sort of wrap up. And now I'm in the territory of like, I have some contracts, but I also have the freedom of like, I can work on whatever I want to work on. And so now it's like, well, do I go back and finish this novel idea that I wanted to write but didn't have time? Do I knock out all these exciting short story ideas that I have? So I think figuring out, like, accepting the fact that I have a finite amount of time, particularly for spec projects that are not, contracted.
Right.
Which thing do I want to tackle first and why? So yeah.
Well,
Michael?
I figured at this stage of my career that I would just do some more novels, some more short stories, things that appealed to me, and that would be enough. But that's not how it was going to work out, because a guy I know came to me not too long ago and said he needs help with a preschool animated series. And I was like, my first inclination was like, I don't do that stuff. And then I said, it's a story, right? It's got characters, it's got a theme, it's got a plot. Yeah, let's give it a shot. And actually turning out pretty well. So I'm glad that this thing fell in my lap, and I kind of got a chance to use muscles that I'd never used before. So I feel challenged, and I guess the lesson is you always have to feel challenged. You can't ever get complacent.
Right. Then that's a problem, because if you start to feel like, oh, there's no challenge, then like you said, you get complacent, and then I think it probably starts to reflect a little bit in the work, because there's no fire in the belly. How about you, Keith?
Once again, Kelly stole my answer. Time management is always the biggest challenge and the biggest struggle. I have so many stories I want to tell, and so many things I want to do, and so many projects I want to do, and there's only 24 hours in the day, and there's only 52 weeks in the year, which is really rude. And
right?
And plus again, I have to make sure that I'm doing stuff that actually generates income, because the landlord gets cranky if I don't send them the rent every month. So and I'm in a household where both of us are self-employed, so it's like there's no steady income at all, which is a completely ridiculous way to live. So of course we both live. We both love it. It's worth it for the flexibility, but the anxiety is real also.
No, I understand. It's a love. You're the starving artist is not it's a real thing, but you're doing what you love. So
yeah, and we're not starving. We're doing fine. And
right, I'm sorry, I didn't want to imply that you're starving. You're not starving.
Damn it.
But going from project to project and not having like a 9 to 5 is really a different thing to put your head around.
Yeah, and I'm used to it now. I've been doing it for 26 years, but it's still a challenge to just find the time to do everything.
Right.
You have to create the time, because the time won't just show up. It's not something that rolled under the couch that you can find down there. You've got to make it yourself, and that's difficult. That's much more of a challenge than anything in terms of like coming up with stories. I have no problem coming up with stories. I'm constantly coming up with stories.
So can we talk a little bit about that, about finding time, and about I know we're almost coming up on an hour, but can we talk a little bit really quickly about finding time? Because I know I procrastinate, and then I have to well, what are you doing? You're procrastinating. Get to work. Do you all go through that? So we'll take you, Keith, and then we'll go around.
I try not to. Every once in a while, you get a case where it's just I don't want to do anything. I'm just going to sit on the recliner and watch Netflix
and veg out. Right.
Usually, I'll get out of that. I'm also a martial artist, and actually, one thing that helps is going to the dojo, going to a class, working up a good sweat, and that sort of resets my brain a little bit when I'm struggling with things.
Michael, I'm sorry.
You want to? I was just going to say but it really is a matter of self-discipline of and that's incredibly difficult. But
Michael, self-discipline.
It's a lot of writers say, I have to do 500, 1,000 words a day, whatever it is.
Right.
I have a lot of trouble getting myself to do that. So what I do is I say, you don't have to write a word, but you do have to sit at your computer from 8 to 5. And if 5 o'clock comes around and you didn't write anything, that's okay. But you dare move from that computer, right? And it's only after I feel like I've written quite a bit that I allow myself to move away from the computer. And I find that takes the stress out of it. Like I can sit there for that many hours, it's cool. I'll forgive myself. But not once has it ever turned out that I didn't write what I wanted to write.
Wow. That's a life lesson. That's amazing. Kelli, how about you?
So I have a day job. I work at a university teaching and advising students. And so my challenge is fitting the writing in around that because I really love the work that I do. Keith mentioned like discipline. So it really helped me to sort of get a really solid routine. So my current routine is I wake up at 5, I work out at 6, I write at 7, and then I go to work at 8. And then I have a couple of longer blocks of time set aside that I write with other people. So,
Right.
for 3 or 4 hours during the week. And so that kind of like, I don't know, it guarantees the time with my laptop when I'm alone, in the morning before work, like Mike was saying, that I'm able to just kind of zero in and do my stuff, which is a great way to start the day.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, so we're coming up on an hour. I have one last question though, so we're going to go a little bit over. And I wanted to ask you. Often people are asked, "What would you tell your younger self?" That kind of thing. And I was like, "Oh, that's a great question to ask." But I want to know, what do you feel your younger self from when you started would say to you now about where you are, and as a writer, of course. And let's start with Kelli.
Oh man. I mean, I am beyond what my younger self thought was like possible, and so I think like my younger self would be really excited and say like, hell yeah, we did it. Like that's
Great.
it's a cool place to be in. But I was also, because my writing career started while I was a high school teacher, I was always also cognizant of like I'm modeling for my students like what it looks like to follow your dreams, like,
Right.
and so it feels good to have done that and to be here now
Wow.
on the other side of it.
Wow. Dream big, right?
Yeah.
Keith?
I think my younger self would look at my life now and be much more confused about the fact that I'm married to a different person than I was then. But having said that, I think mostly my younger self would look and say, "Oh, you mean it worked? Great."
Right. That's fantastic. And Michael?
My younger self would be very, very grateful. Thank God, dude, you did this, because if you hadn't done this, what a nightmare our life would have been. I actually do wake up, every few months. I wake up and go, "Oh, wait a second. Did it happen or did I dream it?" And that's a nightmare. That's really a nightmare. So, my younger self would be grateful we avoided that.
Yeah. I did the corporate thing. No, go ahead, Keith.
This is exactly the life I wanted when I was young. This that I have now.
Wow.
So I'm incredibly grateful for that. I know that's rare.
Yeah.
That not everybody can say that, and that could change, next week. But for now, at least, this is where I wanted to be. So my younger self would be probably, dancing a jig.
Yeah. No,
which I can't.
Exactly. I did the corporate thing for a while, and I was fairly good at it. And I worked with a lot of people that let go of their dreams, whether it was musically or in other genres. And my intention was always just to do well at the job I was working at, but always to get to this. And I'm thankful I never let go of that, because sometimes we do, because life happens, So sometimes we do. So we're at the end, and it's been a really fast hour. But I really want to thank you all for being on this first Roundtable Series of Sold the Story. It's been an incredible honor to have you all here. And I just want to say thank you for your participation and for your heartfelt answers. And just having you here has been a thrill for me. So thank you very much. And I also have to and would be remiss without thanking everyone watching or listening for being a part of Soul of the Story community. Thank you, right? And if you're new, please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss any of these conversations by incredible individuals like our panel. And hey, if you've got a brand or a project that you want to reach, or a community that truly values authenticity like this community does, and storytelling, diverse perspectives, consider sponsoring the show. Our community enjoys connecting with new voices, and you can find all the details in the show notes, or head over to SyFy Sistas.com/sponsors to learn more. So thank you. Thank you, Kelli. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, audience. And we'll see you next Tuesday at SyFy Sistas Inc. for the live show. Please don't miss it. Thank you again.